A fake marriage to save his empire. The Korean Mafia boss didn't expect to fall first. He had survived assassination attempts, hostile takeovers, wars fought in boardrooms and back alleys simultaneously. He had built an empire on the principle that emotion was a liability and control was the only currency that never devalued. Kang Ji-hoon had a plan for everything, contingencies for his contingencies. And when the Hong family ultimatum arrived, marry within 60 days or watch your northern territories dissolve into their hands, he had a plan for that too. Clinical, efficient, a contract marriage with a woman chosen for her discretion, her intelligence, and her complete absence of romantic interest in him. A transaction with a timeline, an arrangement with an exit clause. What he did not have a plan for was her. For the way she read a room faster than his most trained lieutenants. For the way she argued with him, not to win, but because she was right and she knew it and she expected him to be capable of recognizing that. For the way she fell asleep in the car after his mother's dinner and looked, for the first time since he had met her, completely unguarded. He did not have a plan for what happened in his chest in that moment. And Kang Ji-hoon had never once in his adult life encountered a problem he didn't have a plan for. If you stay until the end of this video, you will understand how the most controlled man in a world built on control became the first one to fall, and what that cost him before he admitted it. To understand how a man like Ji-hoon falls, you need to understand what he was built from. Not born into wealth, built toward it. The Hong family had resources, but Ji-hoon had constructed the empire as it existed today through 20 years of decisions that required him to be the coldest person in every room. Cold was not cruelty. Cold was precision. The ability to see every situation without the distortion of want, of fear, of attachment. He had watched men more powerful than him lose everything because they loved something, a woman, a son, a vision, more than they loved strategy. He had made a private decision at 22 that he would never be that man. It had served him completely for over a decade. The Hong ultimatum arrived on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he had a list of candidates. By the following Monday, he had narrowed it to one. She came with an unusual recommendation, not from his network, but from a conversation his most trusted advisor had overheard at a conference. A woman who had, in 40 minutes of conversation with a rival's associate, extracted information that their own intelligence division had spent 3 months pursuing. She hadn't used manipulation, she had used genuine curiosity and exceptional listening. And the other person had talked because she made them feel, entirely authentically, that what they were saying mattered. That was the skill Ji-hoon needed beside him. He sent the approach through proper channels. She took 4 days to respond. He found that interesting. The first meeting established terms in 40 minutes. She had clearly prepared, not to impress him, but to protect herself. The distinction was visible in how she presented her conditions, not aspirational, structural. What she needed, what she would not compromise, and what she expected from him in return, stated with a directness that most people in his world spent years learning to perform, and she delivered as simply the way she communicated. He appreciated it, filed it, moved forward. The engagement announcement generated the response he had calculated. The Hong family paused their territorial movement. Rivals recalibrated. His board exhaled. The plan was functioning exactly as designed. The first public appearance was a charity dinner. She wore something that managed to be appropriate for every person in the room simultaneously, which was a more complex social calculation than it appeared, and he noticed that she had made it without visible effort. She worked the room during the pre-dinner reception with the naturalistic ease of someone who genuinely liked people, which was different from his trained socializing in a way that produced better results than his trained socializing. He watched her make a 70-year-old patriarch laugh with what appeared to be a completely unscripted comment, and noted, with the precision he applied to everything worth noting, that she was doing something he couldn't fully reverse engineer. That was unusual. Almost nothing was difficult to reverse engineer when you were watching carefully enough. The complication arrived gradually, which made it more dangerous than anything sudden. Sudden he could respond to. Gradual meant it was already significant before he identified it. It began with the meetings. She attended 3 sessions with his senior advisors, not required by their arrangement, but she had asked to understand the business context that shaped their public appearances. She sat, listened, and at the end of the 3rd meeting asked a question that stopped his most senior advisor mid-sentence. Not an aggressive question, a structural one, about an assumption embedded in a long-term projection that everyone in that room had accepted as foundational for 4 years. The assumption was wrong. She had identified it in her 3rd meeting from contextual listening. His advisor confirmed it over the following week. He called her that evening, not to thank her because gratitude in his world was communicated through action, not statement. He called to ask how she had seen it. She explained her reasoning in a way that was clear, sequential, and entirely without performance. She wasn't demonstrating her intelligence, she was just answering his question. He stayed on the call for 40 minutes longer than the question required. He noticed this afterwards, filed it in a category he didn't have a name for yet, the category that was accumulating entries faster than he was comfortable with. Had you ever tried to stay rational about someone who kept making that impossible? That's where he was, and he hadn't admitted it even to himself. His mother's dinner was the first moment Ji-hoon understood that the situation had moved beyond the boundaries of what he had designed. His mother was the only person whose perception he could not fully manage, not because she was more perceptive than him, but because she had loved him long enough to read what existed underneath his control rather than the control itself. He had briefed his contracted wife on his mother the way he briefed her on all high-stakes interactions, complete, precise, focused on what mattered. What he hadn't anticipated was that she would ignore the briefing, not defy it, move past it. Because within 10 minutes of meeting his mother, she had identified what his mother actually needed from that evening, which was not the performance of a happy relationship, but a genuine conversation with someone who was interested in her son as a person rather than as a position. She gave her that, authentically, without calculation. His mother talked more that evening than she had at any family dinner he could remember. At one point she said something about him, something true and specific and slightly vulnerable that she had clearly never said in front of him before, and his contracted wife listened with an attention that was entirely real and responded with a warmth that was entirely real, and Ji-hoon sat across the table feeling something shift in his internal architecture in a way that had no tactical explanation.
The car, after the dinner. She fell asleep before they reached the highway. The particular exhaustion of someone who had been genuinely present for an entire evening rather than performing presence. He could tell the difference. He had spent 20 years in rooms full of people performing presence. This was different. She carried in every public moment, made something in him very still. He looked at her for longer than was necessary or explainable. Then he looked forward. His driver said nothing. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when they arrived at her building, he did something he had not planned. He waited until she was inside before telling the driver to go. Not for security reasons. He had people for security reasons. He waited because, and this was the thought he examined from multiple angles, looking for the rational explanation and did not find one. He wasn't ready for the evening to end. This was the moment. Not a dramatic one, not cinematic. A man in the back of a car who had controlled everything for 20 years, realizing with the quiet precision he applied to all important realizations that something had happened that he had not authorized, that he was, and he sat with this word for a long time before accepting it, invested in her, without having planned to be. Here is what this story reveals that lives beneath all its surface drama. What it means when a person built entirely around control encounters something genuine. Control as a complete life strategy works until it meets its specific failure condition, and the failure condition is always the same, something real. Kang Ji-hoon could manage performance. He was exceptional at reading strategy, detecting calculation, navigating the gap between what people presented and what they wanted. What he had no defense against was the absence of gap, someone who presented exactly what they were, whose warmth was actual warmth, whose intelligence wasn't deployed, it was just how she thought, whose interest in him, when it developed because of who he was when he forgot to manage how he appeared. Research on emotional attachment in high-control personalities consistently identifies the same pattern. The thing that breaks through is authenticity, specifically because the defensive architecture was built to manage everything else. He had been managing everything else for 20 years. He had never had to manage this. And the irony, the one that kept him awake in a way that nothing external had managed to do for years, was that he had chosen her precisely for qualities that made her impossible to stay detached from. He had selected his own undoing with the same precision he applied to everything. And somewhere in the sleepless hours of that recognition, something that had been rigid for a very long time began, without his permission, to soften. The moment he admitted it to himself in the specific private language he used for decisions that actually counted was not romantic in the conventional sense. It was more like a tactical assessment that arrived at an unexpected conclusion. He had been running the calculation for weeks without naming what he was calculating. What is she to the arrangement? What is she to the business? What is she to... And here was where the calculation kept producing an answer that didn't fit any established category. What is she to me? The answer, when he finally allowed it to complete, was comprehensive. She was the most genuinely interesting person he had encountered in a decade. She was the only person in his immediate world who responded to him without the filter of what he represented. She made his mother laugh in a way that added something to his mother's life that he, with all his resources and all his love, had not been able to add. And she was, by the terms of the arrangement he had designed with deliberate precision, scheduled to exit his life in 4 months. He called a meeting with his lawyer to discuss the contract, not to end it, to understand every possible mechanism for extending it in ways that she would have to genuinely agree to, because anything she didn't genuinely agree to was, by every measure that had started to matter to him, not worth having. He was, for the first time in 20 years, prepared to be in a position he hadn't designed in advance. What happens after that decision is not the end of complexity, it is the beginning of a different kind. Because telling a woman who entered a contract arrangement with a man who represents everything controlled and calculating that you have developed genuine feelings requires a level of vulnerability that is, for someone like Ji-hun, genuinely more frightening than any external threat he has faced. External threats have countermeasures. Vulnerability has none. She listened when he told her, in the way she always listened, completely, without interruption, processing rather than performing reaction. And when she responded, she said something he had not anticipated in any of the scenarios he had run. She told him that she had spent the last 6 weeks actively trying to talk herself out of the same thing, that she had been rigorous and disciplined and entirely unsuccessful, that the contract had felt like protection and had turned out to be the thinnest possible membrane between her and something she hadn't budgeted for. He had not planned for the specific quality of relief that arrived with those words. Relief was not an emotion he had significant experience with. His world didn't produce much of it, but he recognized it. And he recognized in the same moment that this was what he had been building toward without knowing he was building toward it. Not the empire, not the strategy, not the position. This. 2 people in a room, without performance, without calculation, just present with what was actually true. He built an empire to never need anything he couldn't control, and then, with the precision that defined everything he did, he selected the one person capable of making that architecture irrelevant. There is something worth sitting with in that. The things we construct to protect ourselves often contain, already embedded in their design, the exact opening through which something real will eventually enter. Ji-hun's control was not a wall, it was a filter, and filters, by definition, let some things through. What got through was her. What she revealed in him was not weakness, it was the part that had been waiting under 20 years of necessary hardness for something that warranted softness. That part does not disappear in people who bury it. It waits, and when it finds the right circumstance, when someone real appears inside a structure built to keep everything managed, it moves faster and more completely than anything planned. If you made it here, you held this story all the way through. That means something about what you were looking for in it.
Maybe recognition, maybe hope, maybe just the satisfaction of watching someone designed for control discover they were also designed for something else. The channel continues